Welcome to episode 31 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. Imagine with me for a moment. It doesn't matter if you are a classroom teacher, or building principal, or a district superintendent. Imagine that you are preparing to take over a new classroom, a school, or a district. Imagine that you have put in the time, the energy, the research to make sure when you step foot into your new setting that you were ready to go. You began learning the nuances that come with a new classroom. Imagine you have taken the time to learn the operating principles by which the building functions. Imagine you have learned everyone's name and position and history within the organization, all the way from the custodial staff to the maintenance crew to the office staff and bus drivers. Now, 2 weeks ahead of taking over, you are feeling pretty good. Then the unthinkable news is delivered to you. You will be taking over, but it's going to be a different room, or a different school, or a different district than you have been planning for. What's worse, you pretty much can't use anything you have planned for. You're not teaching first grade, you're now assigned 7th grade ELA. And you're not going to be a principal of a primary building, you're off to head up a high school. And you won't be the superintendent in a suburban elementary district. You're going to take the reins of a rural unit district consisting of pre-K through 12th grade. In other words, The question is, what would you do? You can't argue it. It's beyond your control. Well, this is exactly what happened to David Marquet. Only he wasn't in an education setting. He was a submarine captain in one of the Navy's fleet. David was set to command the USS Olympia when he received news that he would instead take the helm of the USS Santa Fe. What's worse, the Santa Fe was the worst performing submarine in the entire fleet. But David used a style of leadership that not only turned the ship around, but it became the highest performing submarine that the Navy has ever had. And he's going to share with us how we can apply some of these same leadership methods to our education settings. David, welcome to Anchored in Education.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. So, let's dive, no pun intended, right into it. You spent over a year preparing, studying, and learning about the submarine, the Olympia. And then at seemingly last minute, you were reassigned to serve as captain to the USS Santa Fe. So not only was this a completely different type of submarine, it was also at the time the worst performing submarine in the fleet. Can you tell us your initial reaction when you found out you were being assigned to a totally different type of submarine and a completely different crew?
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, my life is over. So the Santa Fe at the time was the laughing stock of the fleet, and we would sort of joke, oh, thank goodness we're not on that ship. And the problem was I'd come up through this environment where knowing all the answers was what you were rewarded for. And I had taken over. I was kind of the fix-it guy, and the Navy had sent me to a series of underperforming commands and organizations, and I helped turn them around. But it was always based on the fact that I was very learned about the specifics of what we needed to do. And I would come in and had good powers of observation, and I would look and see what people were doing and what they were doing wrong. And then I would order them to stop doing certain things and start doing more things. And it worked. It improved performance. It didn't build leaders, and it didn't sustain after I left because it was just rooted in my personal abilities. So since I was rewarded for this, the Navy promoted me. But what happened was the captain on the Santa Fe quit abruptly a year early, so the Navy had to find someone on short notice to take over the position. And I was just about to take over the Olympia, as you said, and they said, no, Santa Fe. And it was really, I remember the day so clear. I was such a daze that whole day. Like, I don't know, like, what is my life how's this going to work? And so that's kind of the start of the story, is going down to this broken submarine and feeling like I was literally feeling this Alice in Wonderland feeling as I was looking at all the gauges and dials. I mean, I knew the physics of submarine. I don't want to overplay it too much, but it clearly was a different environment and different equipment than what I'd been trained on.
When you were reassigned to that, I mean, did you believe that you were being put on that because of your previous training and your leadership capabilities?
Partly it was because of simply opportunity. I mean, I had just finished the school for commanding officers, and I was ready to go. I was about to take over in 2 weeks, and so I was in Hawaii, primed and ready to go. And partly it was because I asked my boss, like, why did you guys pick me? And he said, he said, of all the guys in the class, I was one of the most curious.
Okay.
And he wasn't really sure why or how, but he knew that was going to be a very important characteristic. And he was right. The weird thing was I didn't particularly feel curious. I love learning.
Yeah.
I love investigating things. I love the discovery process. I'm like one of these guys where you're in a conversation with someone and we're talking about like Boris Johnson did something in England with the members of parliament. And I don't really I don't understand that whole system, by the way. That whole thing works. But I'm one of those guys, like, stops the conversation and like, hey, Google, what is a member of parliament? And like, I'm like that guy.
Yeah.
So like the learning really is, I loved it. I'm a great student. I was a great student, and I love learning. But the downside of that was that knowing stuff was my thing. Like, knowing the answers, that was my thing. And then I get to the submarine, but I don't know the answers. It was unbelievably upsetting. It made me very anxious.
I can only imagine. And you sort of alluded to this here, but as you journeyed up through the ranks in the Navy, you quickly noticed that the Navy had the leader-follower model, in which the focus is compliance rather than thinking. In fact, I think this is the model that we see that is adopted by many companies and, unfortunately, schools as well. So at what point did you decide you wanted to see a leader-leader model, and thus adopting the philosophy that says, if you want your people to think, don't give instructions, give intent?
Yeah. So what happened was, when I got to the Santa Fe, I only had 2 weeks. I took over the ship. I gave an order which couldn't be done on the submarine.
Okay.
And the officer basically was like saying, shift into second gear on an engine that only had one gear. It was only a 1-speed motor.
Uh-huh.
But the officer ordered it anyway. This was the shocking thing. And then it wasn't until it got to the crew member who actually needed to turn the knob, who shrugged his shoulders and said, well, this is a 1-speed motor. It doesn't make any sense. And I looked at the officer and said, did you know that? And he said, yes, I did. And so the point is not that he didn't know it, is that he knew it and he still ordered it. This is the power of compliance and hierarchy. And we love being a can-do organization. And we're so good at getting stuff done. But what I think we need more now is a can-think organization. And I think this has ramifications for business and education. Because education was about knowing stuff, at least for me, and being able to respond with the correct answer, as opposed to maybe thinking through a problem and coming up with some where there's multiple possible answers, and we have to make a commitment to do something to test to see whether one of these multiple answers, which is going to work, and then make these course adjustments and have more of an experimental approach.
Sure.
So for me, people would say, "Oh, this is this is such an enlightened approach." It was not. It was an approach based out of fear and panic. Because I knew if I kept giving orders, we were going to die, literally, because someone was going to do something that they were going to comply with, and an order that I gave that wouldn't be good, and they weren't going to speak up.
Yeah, they were just
And
going
what
to
I needed
follow it.
was correct, and what we needed was I call it a can think. Not only thinking, but thinking and doing. We need can do and can think. And when I say, "Hey, do you guys have a can think organization?" It's like, it sounds weird. It's not a familiar phrase, and which just shows the power of, we're a can do organization. And so we need both, but we're overly biased into doing.
Sure.
And so we need to balance the doing with thinking. And the problem is, in the industrial age, the people at the top did the thinking and the people at the bottom did the doing. And what I think we need now is everybody doing thinking.
Well,
and everybody doing doing.
Absolutely. And do you believe that a lot of it, whenever you have the employee that follows instructions, knowing that they're not correct or it's impossible to achieve, but they follow anyway, because if they don't, it is more of a fear of consequence.
Correct. So there are multiple reasons for that. Number one is that we say hierarchy, we say safety first or customer first or whatever, but it's really hierarchy first.
Right.
You got to do what you're told. That's the number one rule at work. Number two is it allows us to dodge responsibility, because throughout organizations and throughout history, the number one way to dodge responsibility is to say, "I was doing what I was told." So this absolves you of the bad behavior that maybe is going on, and it allows bad behavior, bad consequences to propagate through the organization. So Wells Fargo created 11 million fake bank accounts for customers. Well, their people did.
Uh-huh.
Well, none of those people said, "Oh, I came up with this idea on my own and I just want to do it." Like, they were being pressured into doing it. They were doing what they were, quote, told. And so bad behavior is the result of a command and control environment plus some sort of stretch goal that's not anchored in morality.
Sure. Now, you adopted this intent-based leadership model as the captain of the Santa Fe, but if I read correctly, this wasn't the first time you tried this. So when you served as the engineering officer aboard the USS Will Rogers, you implemented intent-based leadership with your team, and you were trying to empower them, but I read where it more so ended up in disaster, and so much so that you had to revert back to the leader-follower method. But what lessons did you learn from this experience that helped implement a leader-leader style aboard the Santa Fe?
The problem was I didn't understand what empowerment meant. I thought empowerment meant giving people the ability to make decisions. That's part of empowerment. And empowerment means giving people the ability to make decisions as warranted, as supported by their technical competence and their organizational clarity, their understanding of purpose. Those are the two things which unlock the ability to give decision making. If you have an organization with low technical competence or low understanding of purpose, you can't give decision making. You can't do empowerment. What you get is a mess, which is what happened to me.
Okay.
And I didn't understand this. It seems pretty obvious and intuitive once you explain it, but you can only give someone the ability to make decisions about the reactor if they understand technically, if they understand reactor dynamics, and if they understand what we're trying to do. We need to get the reactor started up because we're trying to get underway because we have to do a mission, blah, blah, blah. So the whole thing is the first step to empowerment, or your ability to empower will be limited by the people's technical competence and their organizational clarity. So number one, you have to know what it is, which means you have to talk about it, which is uncomfortable for some people. And number two is you got to work hard to increase both of those things. And that will let you have a more empowered organization. and I didn't understand that. I just tried to give decision making to people who weren't practiced in decision making, and that was a disaster. Too many people think of empowerment as a light switch.
Okay.
It's I make a decision or you make a decision, and I think of it more like a rheostat or a thermometer where I can. So I'm dialing the temperature from 65 to 68 to 71 to 74 to 78. So in other words, I can tweak the level of empowerment. It's not black and white. So for example, your involvement in a decision might simply be do what you're told. That's the lowest level. Then it's you tell me what you see, but then I'll still tell you what to do. And then you tell me what you think, and I'll tell you what to do. Then you tell me what you recommend, and maybe I approve it, but you don't do it unless I say yes. And then intent is you tell me what you intend to do. And the difference is if I don't say no, the answer is yes. If I don't respond to the email. So emails in my business, in my company sound like this. Hey, at the end of today, we're gonna publish an article or something. And the person who's written it sends it to me, says, I'm inviting the team to provide feedback by noon. Otherwise, I intend to publish at the end of the day.
Okay.
So I know, let's say I'm giving a speech. I don't have time to look at it. So I'm not going to hold up work. It's still going to go out.
I see.
But if I do want to look at it, I got to look at it. I can't say, I'll get to it tomorrow or the day after. In a permission-based environment, the result of that is the article never shows up. The work never gets, the commitment we never move from thinking about it to doing it because they're waiting on me. But in an intent-based environment, there's this bias for action because if I know I have to look at it if I want to look at it because it's going to happen anyway.
You mentioned that creating an environment for thinking will feel wrong. And this is because we've been wired to take control and attract followers. Do you have any recommendations how we can push those thoughts aside and rewire our thinking to be that of giving control and creating leaders?
We call it acting your way to new thinking. And for us, it's give choice, make it small, and then take action. So the whole purpose between giving choice and making it small is to make it feel safe. You want the change to be imperceptibly small and not feel scary. If it feels too scary, you're doing it wrong. So the first step might be, hey, I just want you to talk about this. Imagine I wasn't here and you guys had to make this decision. Just talk through the decision as if I weren't here. Let me just listen to you guys. And they talk for 5 minutes, and then you can hear what they're saying. And so they're exposing their thinking. That's just and then you can say, okay, great, stop. Now I want you to do this. You can still tell them what to do, but now you've learned something and they've practiced exposing their thinking. And then you keep doing that. And then one day you're going to say, you know what, that sounds pretty good. Why don't you guys go do that?
How difficult is it not to just jump in right away?
It's super difficult because wow, that feels like a huge waste of time. Like, oh my gosh, I know the answer. If I just say turn left, let's keep going, then you're making progress. But the problem is, think of it in terms of two vectors. I'm doing production, but I'm not building the capacity for my team to make decisions. I'm not building it. So part of your job as a leader is to make decisions, but I would argue an equally important job is to build a team that can make decisions. Because if you neglect that leg of your job, then all day long you're going to run around making decisions, and you're never going to get out of that. You're just going to be an individual contributor like everybody else. You're going to be on that gerbil wheel.
Yeah,
and it's only when you build a team, they're coming to you. They come to you all day long saying, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I intend to do. Here's what I want to do. Here's what we're going to do. And you're like, man, this is awesome. They're all coming to me. I don't need to chase people down.
And like you said, then all of a sudden you don't have one captain on the ship. You have 100 captains. And
that's what it felt like to me. I had all these people who were thinking and coming to me. They were leaning into me.
And you had Stephen Covey aboard your ship, and he got to see it in action. and then he wrote a book, the Eighth Habit, based off what he saw on your ship. So I mean, it obviously it impressed upon him and others too that it works.
And that was such an amazing day. I was a huge fan of Dr. Covey. I'd read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. It changed my life in a profound and positive way. And in a sense, all we were doing on the submarine was we had taken his book, and for each of the habits, we would ask this question: what would it sound like if people were proactive? What would it sound like if people started with the end in mind? And then we would just put language to each of these habits, and then we would practice that language. We wouldn't make a commitment to, quote, start with the end in mind. We would make a commitment simply to practice the language that we had decided it would reveal a mindset of starting with the end in mind. And when you say, let's make a commitment to say it feels very light, it's not invasive. But when I say, I need to change your mindset about this, it feels like deep criticism. And it puts people off.
Yeah.
And they resist it. So we never said that. We never said, hey, you're all screwed up. I need to fix the way you think. We just said, hey, let's practice the words this way. Let's try these different words.
It really, so you have the ability to empower everybody in there. And so I want to use kind of like a school scenario here, thinking that, if somebody comes in and they have like this intent-based leadership set up within the school, I don't want people thinking like, okay, that worked for Captain Marquet whenever he was on the ship, but after you left the Santa Fe, it continued to outperform all other ships in the fleet because that leadership model continues. So, I mean, how does this set in stone something that's beyond just the leader? Like it wasn't, you may have implemented it, but it went beyond your time on the Santa Fe.
Yeah, well, we have educators that are practicing this like I suspect you are,
Mm-hmm.
and we've heard stories of amazing results. So, for example, there's two ways to think about pushing. The phrase is push the authority to the information. So in one school, this is a private school that teaches, that specializes in kids on the autism spectrum. And each of these kids has a paraprofessional. It's typically a quite low-paid person, and they're basically there to deal with behavioral problems. But this person spends all day with kids.
Uh-huh.
This person has the most intimate, detailed knowledge of Johnny's having a bad day, or this is a recurring problem. So when the parents call and they want to find out, or they do a parent-teacher conference and want to know about their kid, it was a very sterilized environment. Not only could they not talk to these parents, but they wouldn't talk to the teacher, but the deputy vice principal used specially curated language to talk about the kids' behavior, because the paras with less education and more intimate contact would sort of just bluntly say things that would sometimes scare the parents. And they said, this is nonsense. Why are we filtering the person who knows the most about the kid from the parent through this big process? And oh, by the way, there's a lot of work involved in that.
Right.
And so they just started letting these paras talk directly to the parents. Now, I'm telling you, there are a lot of administrators there that were super petrified of this. And the owner, it's a private school, and the owner, fortunately, who was pushing this, says, we may get sued. I may have to go, because who knows what's going to happen. But the result was the paras became much more involved, because they say, oh, I'll be able to talk to the parent. And the parents felt much more connected because they're talking to someone that wasn't some filtered, scripted language. It was the person who knows your kid best talking to you about your kid. And as a result, they got more and more students. They've opened more schools, blah, blah, blah. But this is just one simple example of trusting people who have the information. Now, they may need some training. They may need to know there are certain medical terms that you can use or shouldn't use, or don't say this if you don't know, whatever. So that's part of the technical competence part.
Which that's
But the problem is connect people directly with. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the hard work that you said it would take to get to this, though, is the training.
Correct. And then the other thing is, well, how do you quote empower the students? How do you make them in charge of their own learning?
Right.
And part of it is, in my mind, I'm not an expert, although I think businesses are going to start looking more and more like universities, because the focus will be not as much on doing, but it's going to be on learning. And universities may start looking more and more like businesses, because the focus won't be strictly on learning, but it'll be and doing something too. Make a hypothesis and test it, which is what's going to happen in business.
So, in your book, you gave an important piece of advice, stating it's important to have a good flashlight. How can educators across all levels make sure they always have a good flashlight in their classrooms or schools or districts?
So the flashlight was my tool to shine it in the dark places down in the builds and see what nasty rust was happening down in there. And there are a couple of things that hold us back from that. One is this idea that it's scary to find out really how bad it is, so I don't really want to know. And whether it's my own behavior or something that's going on in the organization. And I call that the be good self. The be good self wants to protect my sense of worth in the world.
Okay.
The problem is the be good self crowds out the get better self, which is your persona that wants to be better. Be better next week, be better next year, be better next decade than you were last week, last year, last decade. And we need to tame that be good self, because defensive, reacting badly to feedback, not seeking feedback, that's not going to get you better. And the key is you need to feel safe. You need to feel anchored. And you need to have this forward-looking perspective, not a backward-looking perspective. If you say, what are we going to be like in 6 months, in 6 years? You're like, well, we want to be better. So therefore, you invite that feedback, you invite observation, you invite, so both ways. So the idea is we need to create this environment where people are saying, hey, yeah, shine the flashlight, here are my books, come in my classroom, come observe. Not, oh my gosh, here's the principal sitting in the back of the classroom again. You know, how much fun is this going to be? It's like, oh, that's great. Hey, by the way, can you come next week?
Yeah.
And then afterwards say, hey, look, I had trouble here, and here. Tell me about that. Not, I want to hide all my problems and force you to find them. I hope you didn't notice that, Sally was acting up. Like, hey, by the way, did you notice Sally was acting up? And I didn't really know how to deal with that. Well, you saw what I did. I separated her, but was that, like, what do you think? How else could I have dealt with that? And just have this, like, seeking better attitude.
Well, and it creates a whole nother level of trust as well.
Right, because it feels like we're in the same boat. We're rowing together. Not you get to sit in the back of the canoe with a paddle and hit me on the head when I don't row in the right direction.
That's a great metaphor, great mental picture that I was able to paint there. Hey,
yeah.
Before we go, David, you have a new book coming out next year. It's called Leadership as Language, The Hidden Power of What You Say and What You Don't. And if I saw correctly, it comes out February 4th, which is my birthday. So in case my wife is listening, that would be a great birthday present for me.
Thank you.
But do you think that we could get a glimpse as to what to expect from that book?
Yeah, so it's about language, as you can imagine from the title. And the idea is The hypothesis is that we've been programmed by the Industrial Revolution to use the language that we're currently using. And that language is designed for a certain purpose. And it's designed to get stuff done. And it's designed to reduce variability, because the Industrial Revolution was about manufacturing. Variability is an enemy to manufacturing. And that without knowing it, if we continue to use this language, we will be subtly but powerfully anchored in get stuff done, a bias towards getting it done, not thinking, and a bias towards reducing variability, not embracing variability. Thinking is an embrace variability sport. So people use reduced variability language and methods in an embrace variability game, and they have less than good outcomes. So I've identified what I think are 6 basic plays, like football plays,
Okay.
that we were programmed for in the Industrial Revolution, and how we need to rescript those 6 plays for post-industrial workplaces.
That sounds exciting. I do believe there is a link for pre-ordering, which I'll put on my website, along with a link to the book "Turn the Ship Around," which is what we have talked about today. David, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on Anchored in Education today.
Scott, thanks so much for having me. Thanks to your listeners. What you guys do, to me, the older I get, the more and more I feel it all starts with education. I'm just sort of rooted in this. I'm losing curiosity about the answer to that question, because it just seems every time I look at problems around the world, that once you just peel the onion back, when you get to the final middle of the onion, it's always about education.
Well,
So what you got to do is super important.
I may have a little bias, but I absolutely agree with you. But I appreciate the recognition of that too, because we have a lot of educators out there doing hard work, and they're doing it every day.
Right. And unfortunately, in our society, I believe it's under-recognized, underappreciated work.
I would concur with you as well. I appreciate that.
Now, you can follow David on Twitter today. Search @LDavidMarquet to find him. And don't forget to visit escottengland.com and click on the Read More link to read more about David and find a link to his book. Turn the Ship Around was one of the first books I read when I became principal. But I quickly realized that what David implemented on his submarine would work for any setting in education. We are too quick to tell people what to do, how to think, where to be, when to act, and so on. You'll notice a key component to intent-based leadership model is not on telling. The focus becomes on asking questions. Questions are powerful. Imagine if our students thought like teachers, teachers like principals, and what if everyone in the organization thought like the superintendent? Speaking as a superintendent, I can't imagine a time when someone comes to me and says what they intend to do. I feel that most know the question I'll follow up with is it best for students? If their answer reaffirms that question, then I see no reason to be a barrier to someone's intent, because at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.